afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Businesses Go Electric for Bromsgrove District Council, Wyre Forest District Council and Redditch Borough Council. Hopefully today we'll give you a bit of insight into what it's like to switch to an electric vehicle, give you some information on that, and give you a bit of an introduction of why that's happening across the UK. Give you a bit of information on how you can electrify your fleet. And of course charging in the workplace as well, because of course people are commuting to and from your work as well as out and about with your business. Do a bit of myth busting around electric vehicles and an idea of what funding is out there as well. So I am joined by Anna Wardle-Hill, who is from Bromsgrove and Redditch Council, and Jenny from Wyre Forest Council as well. So, and I am with Mark Smith, who is going to help me through the presentation today. So if you do have any questions, just pop them into the Q&A. We're doing everything on Zoom this afternoon. And if you do have any questions afterwards, please do email Anna or Jenny. And also we'll link you into the Economic Business Hub as well. And you can have more information there if you need it as well. So just to give you an idea of who we are, why we're here helping today. So the Energy Savings Trust is an independent organisation supporting on the climate emergency. We are very much working with businesses, individuals, communities and of course government to help reduce emissions and energy across the UK. And we are fully funded by the Department for Transport and we're here to support the rollout of electric vehicles. So we're very much here to be an independent advice service, impartial and help on that journey to decarbonising transport. So I'll pass on to Anna just to give you a bit of an update of what Redditch and Bromsgrove are doing.
Thank you, Heather. So yeah, Bromsgrove and Redditch, two very different towns with different needs, but we do operate a shared service over both of them to manage both areas. So I guess it all started in 2019 for us when both authorities declared a climate emergency and decided to keep the climate change agenda and carbon reduction at the heart of all our kind of key decisions that we were making within the local authority. It was quickly followed by adopting an ultra-low emission vehicle strategy in both areas, where we identified how we're going to facilitate the transition to electric vehicles. We were lucky enough to get a grant in Bromsgrove for facilitating the transition of taxis, in particular electric vehicle taxis in Bromsgrove, I think really because of our kind of proximity to the Birmingham clean air zone and things like that were going on. So we don't have that in Redditch, but what we do have, we're currently working on developing a network of fast chargers for both Bromsgrove and Redditch. We're investing capital into this and also hoping to access some government funding to assist us with that. These are going to be to assist residents, visitors and commuters to move in around and around about our towns. But we're also looking within ourselves at our own fleet. We're planning the electrification of both of our depots, so our electric vehicles that collect, so our vehicles that will collect your bins and sweep the streets or things like that. We started with a fleet review from the Energy Saving Trust, and now we're reducing consumption of our diesel and also looking at the infrastructure needed in both our depots to facilitate that change. As well as that, we do work with partners such as Worcestershire County Council, the EST, neighbouring authorities and other organisations to reach out to the community to kind of advise and help and facilitate their transition to EVs as well. Okay. You're still on mute.
Terrible 101. But no, thank you so much. It's great to see what you guys are doing, and that hopefully that helps businesses see that you're kind of leading on that and can see that you're also on this journey, so it's all in it together. So I'll head straight into Jenny's on the journey that you've been going through too.
Lovely, thanks Heather. Yes, so we've also been looking at charging infrastructure across Wyre Forest. So we had some feasibility work carried out looking at our own car parks and own sites. So we had that feasibility work carried out and the capital funding approved to put charge points in place across a number of our car parks. So we're just going through the procurement for that at the moment. So so that work looked at where best to put the charge points according to sort of different types of need, the different types of charge points needed and so on. So so we're just going through the procurement for that at the moment. that will include putting charge points in at our depot site. So as similar to Anna, we're also looking at our own vehicle fleet as well. So yeah, starting off with purchase of one of the smaller electric vans this year. So that's hopefully going to happen soon once we've got the charge points in place at the depot. Just to mention as well, obviously, as district authority, we have sort of the planning policy within our remit as well. So through that, we're also pushing for more electric vehicle charging provision. So that's something that my planning colleagues sort of now expect to see in sort of planning applications and so on. So that's just another part of our remit. And as Anna mentioned, as a two-tier authority, we're working with County Council, who as the Highways Authority obviously have a part to play as well in the electrification and provision of charging infrastructure and so on. And then finally, just to mention some of the awareness events and so on. So the picture at the bottom there is from a recent event that we held outside the Kidderminster Town Hall, which Heather and myself were both at. So this was organised by the Wyre Forest Green Alliance, who are a very sort of active group of organisations locally, supported by ourselves and EST. So basically we've got various electric vehicle owners to come along, and people could come and have a look and talk to the owners and so on. I think there were about 6 or 7 different vehicles there. So it was a really sort of positive event that seemed to be, we got a lot of sort of good questions asked by people who were interested in purchasing an electric vehicle. And we're also holding a version of this webinar for residents on the 14th of July at 7 PM as well, so just to mention that one.
That's great, yes. So there's lots happening, and it's always great to go out and see electric vehicles. And you normally find you can have a chat with somebody that's in an electric vehicle. They always have a green mark on their registration, and I'm sure that they'll probably answer any question that you have, as you'll find out with electric vehicle drivers. That's great. Well, thank you so much, Jenny. So I will let Mark go into the introduction. You're on mute, Mark.
There we go. Too many mute buttons. Right, so yeah, thanks, Heather. I'm going to talk about, well, first thing I'm going to talk about really is kind of some of the background information, sort of why it's potentially going to be a good idea for yourselves and your businesses to switch to an electric vehicle. So Heather, if you could move me on. So kind of one of the main drivers nationally has been, obviously, there's been a massive push in recent years, as I'm sure you'll be well aware. And that's predominantly been driven from a kind of from a government perspective by national policy being really supportive of manufacturers developing EV technology, particularly around batteries and battery range for business applications as well. But then importantly, alongside that, there's been the ban that was announced last year on the sale of new petrol and diesel vehicles, cars and vans by 2030. And then everything to have no petrol or diesel capability by 2035. And then that also now extends to HGVs and larger vehicles as well. So I think the plan is at the moment for everything on our roads to be zero emissions by 2040, up to and including large HGVs, trucks, as well as cars and vans. Which is going to be a really positive step for us as a country. So transport at the moment represents around about 26%-ish of all carbon emissions across the country. And it's the only area that hasn't really reduced since records first started being monitored for carbon in around 1990. There's obviously been, as I'm sure some of you will be aware, there's been a huge surge in demand for freight and logistics, particularly for sort of last mile and door-to-door deliveries due to the increase in online shopping as a result of COVID. And there's also been an increase in demand, consumer demand, I should say, for larger vehicles, sort of SUV styling, as families grow and as people kind of make the choice to have more space in their vehicles, which also has higher emissions associated with those vehicles and the amount of pollution they give out at the tailpipe as well, which leads us on to sort of an issue, well, the issues around air quality and air pollution. So data we have at the moment suggests that poor air quality accounts for around about 40,000 preventable deaths a year, and that's increasing. And there's also increasing public awareness of the impacts of poor air quality as well, particularly in cities, but also kind of more widely as well. And there's kind of a general acknowledgement among those that are in the know around the need to take steps to bring our air quality within legal limits, which is kind of an area that obviously electric vehicles and the transition can help with. It's worth noting though that electric vehicles, while they don't have any tailpipe emissions, so those emissions are negated through switching to an EV, there are still some emissions from brake dust and tire wear and tear, that kind of thing. So they're not kind of the be all and end all of solutions to air pollution, but they do represent quite a significant step towards a significant reduction. And there's benefits to kind of fully decarbonising those last mile deliveries and kind of using active travel or push bikes or e-bikes or e-cargo bikes or something like that for the last mile deliveries if that's within kind of your business. Might be something to look into, and they're obviously cheaper to buy and cheaper to run than vehicles as well, or than EVs or petrol and diesel vehicles as well. And there's also kind of economic opportunities from the switch to EVs as well. So there's obviously a global market for EVs. Sales, as you've probably seen, are increasing hugely. I think we're up to, EV market share at the moment is something around about 25% of all new vehicles, or it was last month, or the last few months, in fact. And there's technology advances obviously occurring all the time. Battery technology is improving. Battery recyclability and the knowledge of how we can recycle and what we can recycle and how much of it we can recycle from a used EV battery is increasing all the time, alongside our ability to produce new batteries, particularly in the UK, up in the north, in Sunderland and others, where traditional car manufacturers are rolling out battery production alongside their vehicle production. And the government has as one of many ambitions, but to position us as a world leader in design and manufacture of low carbon vehicles, low emission vehicles, particularly up at Nissan being key to this. And we've also got some battery manufacturers that have announced some pretty major investments in Sunderland actually as well, which the idea being to add around about 5,000 jobs to the wider supply chain. Another 3,000 in a British Volt factory in Blythe. It's predicted that wants to add 3,000 jobs by 2028 as well. So hopefully some good opportunities in the supply chain from those developments as well. Heather, if you could move me on. It'll still be useful to talk about or clarify what we're actually talking about when we're talking about battery electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles. So battery electric are the vehicles you can see on the left-hand side of your screen. So things like the Nissan ENV 200, the Kona, the Tesla Semi, and the Vauxhall Vivaro E. Other models of vans, cars are available, less so with the trucks just yet, but that is definitely coming. So that's what we mean when we talk about a battery electric vehicle. That's the sort of thing we're talking about. Might also hear them referred to as 100% electric or pure electric vehicles, or just EVs. And typically cars, certainly EV cars at the moment, have a range anywhere from 120 to the very top end models at the moment, claiming a model of over 300 miles for those with the biggest battery packs. Battery technology in terms of the range of electric vans is certainly catching up. It's perhaps a little bit behind the sort of 300 mile plus you might see from a top of the range Tesla or something like that, but they're certainly now catching up there. I think they're up to around about 150, 200 miles range in a van with a payload. So certainly much more practical than they perhaps were a few years ago. And importantly, probably vans are eligible for the plug-in grants as well at the moment. So that's been discontinued for cars, but it is still applicable for vans. And there's a couple of examples of cost. That Vivaro E that you can see on the screen there, if you were to buy the 50 kilowatt model of that vehicle, it would cost you around about £50,000, and it would get you around about 150 to 160, 170 miles on a full charge, which in many cases probably is enough for a good day's work, unless you're just making deliveries, in which case it might not quite fit certainly getting there. And then on the other side of the screen, you've got what we call plug-in vehicles. So they've got a traditional engine plus plus a battery pack of a reasonable size, not as big as you will find obviously in a pure electric vehicle, but the battery pack in a plug-in hybrid will still give you, like it says on the slide there, anywhere between 20 and 50 miles, depending on your payload and how big the battery is and how you drive it. And they have some zero emissions capacity, I guess probably is the point here. Key point to note though on the plugins that have got that are plug-in hybrids, they are not eligible for the plug-in grants, and they are part of the vehicle sales that are banned from 2035. So it doesn't mean you can't own them past 2035, certainly, but it's the sort of thing that will stop being sold after 2035. So a lot of manufacturers will be perhaps focusing more on their battery electric fleets in the coming years rather than their plug-in hybrids. Another example, sorry, Heather, one more example, then I'll move on, promise. So an example of a plug-in hybrid, just to give you an example, that Ford Transit you can see there costs around about £39,000. It's a plug-in hybrid. You'll get around, it's got a 1 litre engine and a battery. So the battery will get you around about 35 miles, but if you take into account the range from the traditional engine of the internal combustion engine as well, you've got around about 300-mile total range in that vehicle, and that's carrying a payload of up to 1.1 tons. So it can work for business use as well as just looking shiny and that you've got a nice plug-in van. Right, Heather, sorry, can you move me on? Okay, so some of the acronyms you're going to encounter, or you might well encounter as you're driving around, and in terms of particularly in cities now, if you're making deliveries into cities, is clean air zones, so CAZ, ultra low emission zones, so ULEZ in the middle of that title, and zero emission zones on the right hand side. So there are slight differences between the three, so it's worth looking up exactly what the differences are. But one of the key things for clean air zones particularly is that your vehicle must emit less than 75 grams of CO2 per kilometre at the tailpipe. So a lot of those the vans that we spoke about just now will apply, will be suitable for that use. But as it says on the slide there, this definition is technology neutral, so they don't have to be electric. They could be hydrogen, they could be another technology as well. But they do, yeah, the key is emitting less than 75 grams of CO2 at tailpipe. Worth saying though that for most of the grants, for small and large vehicles, they have to emit less than 50 grams of CO2 at the tailpipe. So anything that's eligible for a grant is going to be better than the regulations for a clean air zone anyway. And they have to have a minimum travel distance with no emissions at all, which I can't remember quite what it is, but it's it's significant. It's not kind of a token electric range, and then you're back to using petrol and diesel. It's a significant travel distance on just electric range that you need to be looking for those vehicles. And then Heather, if you could move me on again. Worth also talking here about kind of the more specialist vehicles I touched on last mile before. So picture in the top left hand side is obviously a fleet of Sainsbury's e-cargo bikes, nicely liveried up. Obviously benefits for staff as well as or potential health benefits from staff, I should say, as well as being a low carbon delivery mode for your last mile. And certainly there are a number of different styles of e-cargo bike that might be applicable to your business. Don't have to have kind of a big box on the front and a big box on the back. You can get them with kind of an extended front axle and just a very large payload box on the front. And equally, there are other designs as well. There's quite a lot of resources on our website about e-cargo bikes. We delivered a grant scheme around e-cargo bikes last year, and there's a number of case studies on there of the different businesses and different councils that have taken them up and used them as part of their own fleets, and the kind of the impact that's had on their business. And there's also some of the bigger trucks and RCVs. You can see here some conversions and some kind of dedicated electric trucks as well. So RCVs is refuse collection vehicles. You can see kind of bottom in the middle. But just want to pick out a couple of the some of the specs of some of these vehicles. So which one are we looking at here? So the Renault Trucks DZE, which is, I can't quite remember which one we're looking at, probably the one on the bottom left-hand side. It's got a total weight around about 16 tons. It's available with a longer wheelbase. It's got a electric motor, 2-speed gearbox, and a real-world operating range of around about 300 kilometers, with a battery capacity total around about anywhere between 200 and 300 kilowatts, depending on what model you go for. So it should give you a good 300 kilometers of range on that truck. Other one that's worth pointing out is the one, I think, bottom right-hand side, another Renault, but a bigger one this time, so 26 tons. This one, more importantly, got 2 motors and batteries up to around about 200 kilowatts, which gives it Renault claim an operating range of up to 200 kilometers as well. So certainly enough to do more local deliveries. There's some real use applications as well. So DHL, obviously, up in the top, are switching some of their fleet to EVs now, particularly for more urban routes where there are things like clean air zones and ultra low emission zones in effect. And they're proving to be very effective when they're deployed in those more urban environments as well. So Heather, if you could move me on. So I'll talk a little bit again, or a little bit more about how you charge these vehicles. So perhaps let's start off with some jargon busting. I'm aware I've already mentioned a couple of these terms. So just in case you're not aware, in case it's you need a bit of a reminder of high school science, kilowatt is a kilowatt hour, and it's a measure of energy. So it's what our EV batteries are traditionally quoted in. And effectively, it's a measure of how much energy that battery can store. And the important thing about this measurement is that the higher the number, the bigger the kilowatt hour, the longer the vehicle can go for on one charge without needing to be recharged. And the nearest comparison is, if you think about it as your petrol tank or a diesel tank in a standard vehicle, that's essentially what the kilowatt hour is in terms of sort of liters of capacity in a standard car. Roughly can sort of be used as an equivalent-ish to kilowatt hours in a battery. Generally, at the moment, most cars on the roads will get anywhere between 3 and 4 miles per kilowatt hour of charge. So as an example, I drive a Nissan Leaf, and I've got a 40 kilowatt hour battery. I can get around about 150, 160 miles from a full charge. And my average, I think, at the moment is something like 3.8 miles per kilowatt. So a slightly smaller electric car, perhaps, but it demonstrates that it's not totally out of kilter with kind of real world experience. I've been driving that car for 4 years, so hopefully I've got a decent idea of what I'm doing in it now. On the other side of that slide, though, is kilowatt, which is different to the kilowatt hour. So kilowatt is a measure of power, and it's what your charge point is going to be rated in. So if you think about kilowatts and charge points as the equivalent of obviously of a standard petrol station or standard diesel pump, the higher the kilowatt power of a charger, the faster it's going to charge your car. So higher number of kilowatts will charge your car faster, but the greater the number of kilowatt hours in your battery, the longer it's going to take to charge, even on a faster charger. So Heather, if you could move me on in the next slide. This slide kind of explains that in words rather than in pictures. So charge points rated in kilowatts. The higher the kilowatt output, the quicker you're going to get a charge. But it depends on how far you've driven your car to get to that, or your vehicle to get to that point, get to that charge point. It doesn't always consider battery size even. So if you're charging, say 10%, it's not going to take you very long. Whereas if you're charging, if you've driven kind of perhaps further, if you've drained perhaps 80% of your battery, it's going to take you a little bit longer to charge. And most, or in fact all new cars at the moment, can charge from around about 20% charged to about 80% charged in less than an hour on a rapid charger, which is a 50 kilowatt charger or above. Obviously, slower chargers will take longer. And there is always the option of installing a charge point either at your house or at your business premises that will offer you perhaps a charge of 7 kilowatts an hour which will more than likely recharge your car overnight, which is perhaps beneficial in most cases to charging on the road. Has a number of benefits to doing that instead of charging at rapid charges all the time. Okay, so Heather, if you could move me on back to some more jargon busting, which is going to be useful for the next couple of slides. So AC again, it's kind of back to school, but AC is alternating current, which is what we get in our houses as a standard supply. Houses as a standard supply. DC is direct current, which is required, or it's what your car would prefer to charge it if it possibly could. And that allows the cars to charge much faster. So you can see from the picture there, on the left-hand side, you've got alternating current from a standard charge you might see on a house wall, or in fact from a 3-pin plug, standard 3-pin plug. The power will go through an onboard converter in the vehicle that will convert it to DC, which then goes into the battery. Whereas if you're using a rapid charging station, they supply power straight from the charge point in DC current, so it will go straight into the battery. It bypasses the onboard charger. It manages that process within the big charger unit on the side of the road or on the side of the car park, rather than using what's in the vehicle to do that. Heather, if you could move me on again. This is a slide showing some of the different types of chargers you can see, and it goes from sort of slower on the left-hand side right up to the faster chargers we can possibly get at the moment on the right-hand side. So the slower ones, you're going to find, like I said, as sort of home chargers, anywhere between 2 and 3 kilowatts. So it's going to take you sort of 10 or 12 hours to recharge your car. Also available as lamp column chargers in some cities and some towns, but yeah, more commonly used as home charge or home charging for very slow charging overnight. Next along, you've got destination charging. So if you're going to go somewhere, perhaps like a Tesco's, as you can see in the picture there, or most on-street charging and most charging in public car parks at the moment is fast charging, so anywhere between 7 and 22 kilowatts, and that will take around about 4 to 6 hours to recharge your vehicle. Moving on up, charge times come down quite rapidly quite quickly, I should say, from the fast chargers to the rapid chargers. So you're looking at things that you commonly find in motorway service stations and places like that at the moment. We did at McDonald's. You can see from that picture of the InstaVolt charger down on the bottom. Much quicker. They're more for if you're en route somewhere, you stopped for a cup of coffee or a toilet break or some lunch if you're going to McDonald's, somewhere like that. And the idea being you can roll up, plug in, and by the time you've gone and done whatever you're doing at that location, your vehicle is going to be pretty much charged up, ready for you to do the next leg of your journey, whether that's back home or back onto site or wherever. And the last option on that side is the charging hubs and the ultra rapids and things like that, which are becoming more popular as well. So these are the super fast chargers. They can charge your car or charge your vehicle in some cases less than 15 minutes, depending on battery capacity and depending on how fast to charge it can take. But yeah, certainly much quicker. And again, the idea being you can stop somewhere for a brief stop, go in and do whatever you're doing, and come back to your car and it's fully charged, or as near as, ready for you to get on the next day of your journey. And just the last point, we've sort of touched on this again as we've gone through. EVs are not the only solution. So you can see here, EVs are actually quite a long way down this. We call this as transport hierarchy, and EVs are third up from the bottom. Obviously, the best thing to do is not to travel at all. So things like digital communication and speaking over the internet where you can, or on the phone. Next down being walking and wheeling, or cycling. Then public transport and shared transport if you've got that option. Then electric vehicles, and alongside that car sharing, ideally car sharing in an electric vehicle for double the benefit. Below that, you've got your standard in ICE vehicles, and below that, if you really have to, there's air travel. You can see kind of just how many solutions there are that don't involve traveling, or that can involve traveling in a much more sustainable way than using a car, if you can. And we'd encourage you to think about any of those other options before you get to car, just to minimize that carbon footprint as much as you can. That, I think, is enough from me for the minute. I'll hand you back to Heather to talk about some myths.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mark, as well. So in terms of myths, I know that me and Mark both have electric vehicles. So Mark's got a slightly bigger battery than me. I've got kind of one of the 2016 kind of cars, so the Nissan Leaf with 24 kilowatt. But what used to happen was a lot of people would think, well, actually the average range of an electric vehicle real life is about 50 miles. But actually that was almost 7 years ago. Battery technology is changing quite rapidly. And we're finding, as Mark mentioned, that even now, the higher end of the market's getting up to 300 miles on a range. So you can see that in 2020, the top kind of was around about 250 with an average range of 210. But we're finding as more models are coming out, more and higher range that we're getting. But of course, they are slightly bigger batteries, and that will affect, of course, your charge time. So, of course, battery performance can be impacted by a number of different styles of driving. So sometimes if you're a little bit heavy-footed, you will find that your car will not go as far. So you do find that driving electric does change your habits slightly. Of course, if it's a case of it's also warmer, you'll also get a lot more out of the car when it is warm. And when it is in winter, a bit like with your battery in your phone, you will find it has a little less energy in it, but it only affects your trip miles probably by about 2 or 4 miles when your battery is a little bit colder. And of course, it's great with an electric car because if you have it plugged in, you can always use your electric off your house to heat the car up beforehand if it is a winter's day and de-ice. So you're actually not having to use the car battery. You can actually set the car up to do that before you even set off, which is always really handy. And I'm sure Mark and I agree that we love that part in an electric car. And of course, the different charging types, it is less of an issue. All of the public charge point network does have accessibility. So you might hear type 1 chargers, type 2, CCS, etc. We won't go through that, but all of them will have access. So most of the slightly slower chargers, they will actually have a charge connection. So you'd need to actually bring your cable, but some of the higher, faster chargers will come with its own cabling, and they will normally have the 2 on there as well. So there's now more than 33,000 charge points. We found out in the last 3 months, there's over 1,000 charge points being put in. Before that, it was quite slow. The government have of course, got a target of meeting 300,000 charge points by the end of 2030. And that's a big part of the target, and making sure we've got the right charge point in the right place. So some will need slightly overnight charging, some might need the more ultra rapid charging, and that might be more for your fleets that are out and about to have a cup of tea and for 15 minutes have a charge. But for those that are fine, it would just be a charge overnight with a more standard charge. So there is an element within government to have 6 high-powered charge points at all motorway services, and that is something that is driving under the £950 million grant funding for high-powered charge points on their major networks. So there's lots happening at the moment. So range is not necessarily a range anxiety as it once was, as you've probably seen from the plug-in vehicles and why the grants are being stopped, because as technology increases, we're getting more range from those vehicles. So Mark's kind of touched on this in terms of payload. We also have a great example from Staffordshire County Council. They've been using a Nissan 200. NV200, and they found that even with the payload being fully laden, they don't find many miles do come off the range. But of course, it's all around the driving style and making sure it's not too heavy-footed. So you are finding that most of them real-life miles are around about 120 to 140, as Mark mentioned with the Wyre E, that's almost 150, 160. But you are getting a payload of around about 1 ton-ish dependent. So it's always good to have a check online whenever you're looking at these vehicles and what the actual range is. So looking at the kilowatt hour of the vehicle and then deciding what your mileage is when you're going out on business and seeing which vehicle fits the right model for you. So they're all there and there is a huge demand for them. So if you are looking at buying those vehicles, they're probably looking at about a 6 to 8 month wait. But the best thing would be if you do order them, you do get your plug-in grant, which is around £2,500. That is actually taken off the vehicle when you purchase that. And once you put that order in, you can get them. And as we know, with the car grant being pulled out only around about January time, is that make sure that if you are thinking about doing this in future, those grants will probably be removed, but then the vehicles will probably reach price parity. We estimate that to be about 2024, 2025 with a normal van. So as more vans come on the market, price parity. So that's why those grants are out there at the moment. But it's just something to consider if you're looking at for your fleet in future. Around battery, so this is a inside of one of the car batteries. So it's all made up of cells. So when you think of the car battery, lots of queries sometimes go, you know, how much will it cost to replace it if it goes completely dead? Well, actually, there's very rarely ever a need to replace the whole battery. And of course, there are warranties available for battery cover, but most of it is that it's a cell. If there's something on that battery, you can replace it like for like. But most cars and vehicles now, including vans, normally the lifespan of electric batteries going past 12 years, which is kind of equivalent to an ICE vehicle, how long that stays on the road. So previously there was lots of warranties for 8 to 10 years because of course there was questions on it. But a lot of the electric batteries, some of them from the second-hand market, are being used for secondary energy storage, because a battery is not completely dead. When it does reach its end of life, it's about 80% efficient-ish, around about that element, so it can be used for secondary storage. But a lot of the batteries, they are being repurposed. They've got minerals and materials in there that can be reused. There's a site up in Sheffield at the moment that's doing that, but there is a big Veolia plant going up in the northwest, which is going to look at how to repurpose those materials, because it actually is value in the batteries and being repurposed. So that's a big economic element that it could bring jobs into the area, and also skills, because of course it's looking at your staff, you know, in terms of information, how they can do MOTs, etc., and upskilling. So the manufacturers, of course, are increasingly cautious about their supply chains, as we know that there are elements that we can't control in terms of what's happening around the world. But the main thing is that the supply chain is there, and there is demand. So 1 in 4 vehicles was electric at the end of last year, but there is still demand there, and they are fulfilling those at the moment. And if there are any issues, I say it's making sure that you can plan those in with the time frame deliveries I just mentioned. So they might not be available next month or next week. So planning those into your time frames. And everything is about streamlining. So a lot of the battery processes, we might talk about embodied carbon, and we'll kind of go through that. You know, is an electric vehicle less carbon intensive or more carbon intensive because you're making the battery and where they're from? But it's actually the whole life of it. So the battery itself is very carbon intensive, and also making the car itself with the steel, etc. But everything that's been looked at is how to reduce that over its life, really, and making it in manufacture. So it's very much going down in carbon intensity, looking at how to repurpose, recycle, make sure circular economy works. And that's really what we found, that battery electric vehicles are half the emissions of an internal combustion engine throughout its whole of its life. So as you've got it, there's no emissions from the tailpipe, as Mark has mentioned at the start, and it's very much that it can last up to 12 years. And then that, of course, is coming from the grid, and the grid is being put into renewables and reducing the carbon intensity as well. And that's a key part of why the electric vehicle is being moved quite rapidly. Of course, the emissions from a battery can completely vary depending on what country you're in. Of course, if it was a very coal-laden country, well, then again, it would be very carbon intensive. But in the UK, that's the reason why it's low emissions. And there are many charge points that actually use renewable energy. You might have seen some that actually use solar carports. They have solar panels on top, so you use renewable energy, but majority of them all do use renewable energy to that charge point. So there is a bit of an image on there if you did want to learn a bit more. It's from the IEA, and it's just showing you kind of the comparison between an internal to a battery with high emissions or a baseline. So you can see that it's reducing over time. So another thing that keeps coming up is around grid capacity. So you might have a depot, you might have an area where you've got a lot of fleet. I say you might have them go home, and we'll talk about the charge point network. But a lot of the capacity in the grid is there. So a lot of people said, well, how is the grid going to manage with all of this demand, all this electric? All the district network operators, the UK government has looked at, how much demand will be needed over time. And the main key thing is it's not maybe how much, but when you're using it. So trying to use your fleet to charge overnight when there's not so much demand on the grid. So during the day, there's a lot of industry, manufacturing, people using electric during the day at home. But at night between, 6 and 8 p.m, that might be evening peak. Could you do something between 8 and 4 a.m. in the morning and charge up? So there's very much smart charging, that's what it's called, to try and use the grid when it has got extra capacity. And that's a big thing that's being talked about, is how you can do that. And there are different models, so vehicle to grid, where you can actually put the energy back into the grid from your battery and get money for it. So there's lots of different models happening out there to try and help the grid, because of course there's so much battery storage. If it's sat there not being used, it could go back in. So there's a lot of different improvements being made to the national grid infrastructure. So in a nutshell, there is enough electricity. There will be the demand, but it's also using it at the right time and smart charging your vehicles where you can. So of course, just to kind of give you an idea, because sometimes we get questions around hydrogen plugins, what are the carbon per kilometre, and that just gives you an idea. If batteries are much more efficient, they take around about, for the energy actually put into your vehicle, it's about 90% energy efficient compared to an internal combustion engine, which is about 30 to 40% efficient from actually burning fuel and getting it to the wheels and propelling your car. So that's why the battery electric vehicle is one of the reasons that the UK is going on that journey. So business casing then. So of course, the business case for electrification is electrification can reduce 70% of your carbon savings immediately. So that's a really big driver for why a lot of businesses are doing this when they're looking at their footprint, supply chains, etc. And actually, transport might be one of your biggest if you are doing deliveries or you're doing some form of transport, whether that be staff visits, etc. So of course, a big key part that a lot of staff really enjoy is that they're quieter, they're smoother, they're a really enjoyable experience comparatively. It's always weird when somebody whizzes past and you can hear their music, but you might not have heard it before because you are completely quiet. Of course, they do have higher upfront purchase costs, but they have completely lower running costs throughout its life. The maintenance, a lot less parts, and it's a lot easier to run it as well. Of course, with the zones, as March mentioned, the clean air zones, the ultra low emission zones, the zero emission zones, you can get through those congestion zones with free access. Some of them, there might be, if you're a plug-in, that you might have an element. Definitely with zero emission zones, you have to be zero emissions to get through those, but you have a reduced fee through that. And of course, you've got zero road tax at the moment. We get lots of questions about what will that be. There's so many questions on that, it's very hard to tell, but there will be that as the markets go. But at the moment, take advantage of that. And there's a massive increase of models. There's around about 175 at the moment. That's due to go up to almost 300 in the next couple of years. So in terms of cost then, so at home on the off-gem cap at the moment, it's about 20p per kilowatt. So if you were charging a brand new Peugeot E208, which is a 50 kilowatt battery, so it does you around about 270 miles, it costs you about £14 from home. So that would be about 6p per mile. If you're doing it on a public network, the costs go from about 33p for a slightly more standard, so 7 kilowatt charger, to the rapids, which are about 40p odd. And then you've got the ultra rapids, which are about 57p per kilowatt hour. You're looking at a rough estimated cost is around about £21. So again, 9p per mile. And of course, work can also give an added benefit because most of the workplaces are on a slightly lower tariff. So we found out there's around about 14 per staff member were to come in and charge their car for 7 hours at your workplace, it would be around about £7. So there's quite an added benefit to that. And then when we look at the difference between electricity, petrol and diesel, you can see, and hydrogen, you can see that the efficiencies you get from electricity are a lot higher. So it goes back to that, you're getting the electricity direct to your car, you're using it. For hydrogen, for example, you'd probably need 3 times the amount of energy to make the amount of fuel that you would all need to propel that car. So for a smaller vehicle or a light goods vehicle, we are very much going towards battery. A lot of the HGVs, you'll probably see most of them are going towards battery. There's a few that are going towards hydrogen fuel cell. There's a bit of an Innovate UK project going on at the moment, but they are looking at the kind of more Germany to England type models with quite high payloads. But it's at the moment, it's using the right technology for the right part in transport. And that is the reason that we talk around electric vehicles, because as the technology is changing, there are new batteries coming out on the market, and there's some in test phase that are likely to come out, and that will change the market again. So always changeable. So just to kind of give you an idea of some running cost comparisons, so maybe you have some company cars out there, but we do it as, you know, the most popular car in the UK is a Vauxhall Corsa. So we've done a Vauxhall Corsa next to a Corsa. So you can see that the difference in fuel you would normally pay. So this is based on 10,000 miles. So an average UK transport, or the average car journey over a year, would cost you over £2,000 a year. If you were using the same amount of 10,000 miles on electric at 28p, it would be £956 per year. So the amount of savings that you get in fuel, and that's looking at petrol, fuel and diesel, you probably have something comparative. You would be saving around about over a 6-year period, £8,825. I say at this time, the cost of petrol is about 180p, so I think 185 at the moment, so petrol might be a little bit more dear, but that's just something to let you know of. It's still cost comparison over its life. You can get much back in terms of your electric vehicle. So where do I look for buying an electric car? So always research. There's different models with different kilowatt hour batteries, and you can go to something called the EV8 Switch app, which would kind of assess your journeys and see how an electric vehicle would work for you. So there's some really good apps out there to kind of give you a bit of an indication of what would work, so you can look at what kind of car you might want to go to. And as I say, talk to an electric vehicle driver, they're always open to having the chat. But we have got Love EV, Love My EV. You can go on there, you can research and compare different vehicles similarly with the electric vehicle database. Gives you more of that kind of immediate research on the mileage, kilowatts, hour batteries, and the real life miles out of those vehicles. We also, under the Energy Savings Trust, support an electric vehicle approved scheme. And this is for local garages. So you can go on the EVA website, and you can find your nearest approved EVA dealer, and they can give you very much direct information on electric vehicles. They'll be trained in it. They can give you everything. I remember when I went to get my second hand, it was more of a, hey, I have the car for the day, just drive around. I don't quite know how that works. This one wouldn't. It would be that they know exactly what the electric vehicle does. They give you information on their warranties, and they can even give you some of them off free tests and drives. And definitely for fleet vehicles, they'll probably offer you that as well. So just reach out and go on the EVA website to find out more about buying a new EV. Of course, it might be that buying a new EV is not the route that you want to go down. You might want to look at a second-hand or going into some sort of lease subscription service. We're finding that that is very much an increasing want from a lot of people, which is leasing and subscription. Some of them, it might be, well, actually, I want to subscribe to a small car that gets me out on small journeys, and then for long journeys through the subscription service, they can hire out a slightly larger electric vehicle to do the longer journeys. So subscription allows a lot more flexibility on the type of vehicle you might want. And and changing, and that's what a lot of people are going towards. Or, as I say, leasing a vehicle, so you're not having the upfront cost that you would have, but you would have the kind of savings in terms of the electric vehicle and what that offers you. And they offer lower maintenance costs as well. So, and it reduces that risk on you at that point. I say you can buy a second-hand EV, like I've done. There are, I think, almost now 600,000 plug-in vehicles in the UK, and that's going to be the reason that the newer vehicles come down in price parity, is there's more electric vehicles on the market in the second-hand. Main thing is just to check what type of battery you need. Does it come with cables? Some of the older vehicles did come with actual warranties, as in a paid warranty, mainly the Renault Zoe, where you'd pay £50 per month on the battery. So just watch out for that one. I say that's not in there anymore. It was basically over the concerns of people thinking, well, will the battery last? But not many have them, but just double check that if there is a battery lease on it. And I say there's more increasing knowledge in that part. Or you could just go for a car club. There's a lot of car clubs out there. A lot of councils are looking at those as well. Some are community groups as well, looking at car clubs, sharing their EV through different community apps. And there's a lot of range of what options that you could go for. So you might have a second-hand car, think it actually might have an EV, and you could share that out to the community. The challenges, so as we've mentioned, the battery electric vans, there is a high capital outlay, and you do have to look at your infrastructure as well. So we would always recommend that whilst you're looking at your fleets, to check your depots, look at your half-hourly meter readings, understand the size of your depot, what charge points that you'd need, how you could take from the grid, smart charging, those aspects. Have a look at your mileage. What are your high mileage vehicles? What are your low mileage vehicles? What can you kind of do a step-by-step transfer of different vehicles as you're going along? Look at your payload limits, and then your kind of recharging aspect. How often are those vehicles out? Can you charge them on a slightly lower charge that would cost less, or would you be looking at the public network? And then if there's no depot, how you could charge at home. Did they have off-street parking? Could you install one if they did? And then what to do with the on-street parking machine. And of course, whilst you're at work and there are people parked in a car park, you could help them by looking at car sharing spots, getting prime spots in your workplace, and how you could decarbonise grey fleet, so incentivising electric vehicles as part of that. So salary sacrifice schemes are out there, public transport or car sharing to reduce the impact from working from home, because you do have those emissions from people working at home. So the public network, as you mentioned, there's lots of connections. ZapMap is the key place that we normally go. I've pulled out the ZapMap operators in your area. So you've got Genie Point, Shell, Instavolt, and you can see there the cost differences across the area. As you can see, ZapMap is definitely the place to go to find out your charge points. It's updated every 5 minutes, has about 95% of the charge points on there, and you can find out if one is working operational before you go to it as well, or in use. One of the things that you can do if it is that you don't have a depot and people are out and about and need charging, All-Star One offers one card that can be utilised for charging of vehicles. You've also got Octopus Energy doing that, and there's a ZapMap have their own payment system as well. But when it comes to fleets, there are many solutions out there that you can go to. So what we'd always say is, when you are looking at going to electric vehicles for your fleets or for your business, try and do a fleet review to try and help build the case. So looking at the mileage, which vehicles can you change, understanding the cost of those vehicles. As Mark mentioned, some of them can be up to £50,000. Some of them can be a little bit less, or you might go on the second-hand market and they'll be less, but they will change over the next 2 to 3 years as more vehicles come out. Look at your operational needs, how you can charge, where you can charge, and then doing a behavioural element with your teams, looking at driver acceptance. As we mentioned, the heavier footed you are, the less miles you do. So there is a behavioural change aspect to that. So we'll just kind of go through what support that there is. So there, I will leave that with Mark. Sorry, I do appreciate I've just gone over, Mark.
It's all right, no worries. So yeah, so this is a good bit. So this is about funding and what other support there is available for businesses. So Heather, if you could move on again. The first thing is there is support available for, in addition to the kind of the grant support that Heather mentioned around when you buy an EV, there's also grant support for installing a charger at your premises. As it says on the slide, it's available to businesses, charities and local authorities as well. And this grant will cover 75% of the total cost of installation of a charge point, up to a maximum of £350 per socket. So that's per socket, not per point. So the point you can just about see in that picture there has got 2 sockets on it. So it's 1 point and 2 sockets. So you're looking at potentially £700 towards the cost of installing that, towards the cost of installing that socket. If you've got a lot of sites, or if you've got a lot of vehicles or a lot of spaces at your sites, you can have, through this grant, you can have up to 40 sockets across all your sites. So if you've got multiple, maybe think about how you could deploy those across your portfolio. But certainly, the point here is that it's not limited to 1 per business. You can get multiple if that would be useful to you, and if that would be that would be useful. You do need dedicated off-street parking for staff, fleet, or visitors. That's kind of the one thing. But you do not have to have an EV already on your books to apply for this. So you can be going through the kind of this process with an electrician at the same time as looking at your options for what EVs could be suitable for your business. You don't have to have that EV first and then kind of work out how you're going to charge it until you've got a charge point in. You can do both at the same time, and get the charging in ready for that EV to come into your business as well. So you're not waiting around. That's kind of the major kind of business support scheme that the government offers at the moment in terms of charging. But there are some other kind of resources around. So Heather, if you could flick on again. We've got a few on our website. So there's a link there to our fleet support page. And on that page, you'll find links to all of these things. So we've got information on how you can switch your vehicles to electric. We've got a guide for fleet managers on mileage. And there's also some kind of the fleet health check on there as well, alongside some other links to other resources that other organisations have put out that will help you understand a bit more and perhaps make that switch to an EV for your fleet and make sure it's the right switch to make rather than the wrong one, which is obviously never a good idea. And then the last thing to do kind of around support is encourage you to sign up to this newsletter. And I might ask our colleagues from the council to pop back on in a minute if there's anything else they want to say. But yeah, there is a regular newsletter that comes out of businesses around economic development and regeneration. It includes kind of any more grant opportunities that are more local, and information on other low carbon opportunities and energy efficiency. Alongside that, there's obviously, as you can see on the slide there, you've got the links to the business support page on the County Council website, and some other links to the Growth Hub and Sustainability Team support for small businesses that have got some grant funding they can offer as well. Jennifer, Anna, is there anything else you want to add on that slide?
I would just say, yeah, definitely sign up to that newsletter that you've highlighted there from our economic development team. I think really that is the main thing to follow as a business within our region, to keep up to date on EVs, other business opportunities, and also other low carbon opportunities in the area.
Thank you. Heather, back to you.
Oh, unmute, Heather.
Sorry. So thank you so much for everybody for staying to the end. I know that it's quite a lot to take in. Definitely with businesses, it gets even bigger sometimes with going from cars to vans, but hopefully it's given you an overview of the main challenges. I will open it up to any questions because I know we're coming to the end, but I will let Anna and Jenny, if you've got any questions at the end, if you've got anything for us, otherwise I will probably end it there. I
don't think I have any questions, actually. It's very thorough kind of approach of how to electrify your fleet with all the resources available at the end as well. I've had a look at those, and that they are kind of substantial and really supportive as well. So I would encourage anybody watching to go and have a look through those resources that you've already highlighted.
Yeah, thanks. And nothing else for me either, really, just to reiterate what Anna just said, and thanks ever so much. It's, you know, lots of really useful and very thorough information, and lots of links and things for us to follow up on. So thank you. Thanks both.
That's great. So if anybody has any questions, just contact our fleet team at fleet@est.org.uk. Otherwise, you can get in touch with your council through the economic development aspect that we just mentioned. And this is all recorded, so you get this at the end. So thanks to everybody that's been here, and really appreciate it. Thanks so much.